how do you handle in the school business issues around race? So the first question we're going to discuss is, why is race such a hard topic to discuss?
My name is Ruben Perez, or Ruben Perez. I have been in education for about 30 years, and I played multiple roles in K through 12. There are many layers to that onion. And when it comes to race issues, it's more of an emotional reality than a logic reality. And people kind of fight and argue with anything that doesn't already fit the narrative that they've been scripted since birth. One of the biggest problems that I have found is that this is a completely inherited reality. All the different types of opinions and stories that have been told, and some have been valued and some have been dismissed, depending on which group you are. So the stories that are passed down in families, we have to realize that we have people alive today, who witness fountains being separated, restrooms being separated, and we sometimes think we're so far removed from their realities that we just think to ourselves, that's in the past. But for some people, it's very much a part of their story that got them to where they are. So honoring the fact that there's different perspectives, are we going to honor the different perspectives that we have going on? When we talk about the GI Bill from the 1940s, are we honoring the fact that the GI Bill actually helped a lot more white families than families of color? And if we're not going to acknowledge that a college education from your grandfather or your great-grandfather somehow benefits 2 to 3 generations down the line, it's hard for those stories to live on the table. You cannot address systemic support or systemic ills if you don't identify they're even there. So that type of conversation just seems to surface a lot of shame, guilt, and a wanting to retreat or a wanting to attack. But until we become less emotionally committed to what we believe is true and allow other truths to be at the table, it just makes it more difficult to maneuver around them.
Hi everybody, I am Chestin, and I've been in education for about 18 years. I have taught in higher ed, public ed, and been an instructional coach. My doctorate focused on teacher education and retention in urban areas. And so diversity and equity are, of course, a passion of mine, but also keeping teachers in the classroom. And the story that we've been building for our world becomes so real, and we get pinned into this single truth idea, the single story idea, that it literally rocks someone's world when they're faced with truth, data, just the idea that they could have been wrong since the age of 2. And it's not about right or wrong, right? It's this multiplicity, but we start holding on to what we know so tightly that we don't make room for other people's experience and other people's lives. But I think that Black people have had to consistently unpack trauma. Nobody ever told me, there's this race issue in the world. Nobody ever sat me down and had that specific talk, but I knew it. I knew it in elementary. I knew it when my teachers discriminated against me. I knew it when a girl that was a very close friend of mine, when her mother wouldn't shake my hand and when she wouldn't allow her to come to my house, it came off and the Band-Aid was ripped for me at the age of 8, in 2nd grade. And so we observe and we build these truths, and for someone to really bear the guilt and the shame, more often than not, is I see people and they're like, well, I didn't do that. My parents didn't do that. That's not necessarily the issue at hand. It's about moving forward and righting wrongs and making room for people at the table, not just saying, well, I didn't build it. It was built this way. I'm gonna wash my hands of it. But the difficulty is, once I acknowledge that there is an issue with race, if I don't do something about it, then I have this blood on my hands, right? But the problem with that is there's a group or many groups who deal with it and they don't have the option of washing their hands on it because their hands are made of that color.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Curl, and I am a building administrator in Houston, Texas. I have about 18 years in the education field as well, teaching, assistant principal, building principal, all at the secondary level. my work has dealt with under-resourced kids in many instances, and working with campuses and helping realization of equity issues, and making sure that we all have a seat at the table and doing what's best for all of our kids whenever possible. As a building leader and as a leader of an organization, you want to build harmony, right? You want to remain neutral when possible and make sure that the main thing stays the main thing. And that's difficult when it comes to the issues that we're looking at right now. Desmond Tutu, reminds us that if there's oppression going on and you just remain silent, then you're by default on the side of the oppressor, right? So having to stand up and having to stand out and having to recognize something that is difficult as a building leader, when it may alienate some of your organization, is difficult, right? It is not an easy task at hand. If an elephant has a foot on the tail of a mouse and you just remain neutral to say, well, it doesn't have anything to do with me, that mouse doesn't appreciate the fact that you're just going to ignore that this big, huge thing is holding me back or is holding me down. And so it's difficult. It's difficult because the elephant didn't do anything wrong. The elephant feels like I was just here. This is how I'm made. This is the system I'm in. And this thing just happened to be here. And, it's not on purpose. So why should I have to do something? And as an administrator, we look at what's the main overarching thing? Are most of the people happy? Are most of the thing moving forward? And when it comes to something like this, that's just not enough. We have to address those uncomfortable things as well.
Thank you. And one of the things the second question we're going to look at this morning is, if you could provide advice on talking about racial issues, what would that be?
I would give them the advice to just kind of learn and lean into discomfort, Ruby. It's not comfortable for anybody, but we've got to lean into that discomfort, because the things that we don't understand or that are outside of our experience are very real to somebody else every day. And as Michael said, oftentimes it's the kids that are in our classroom that are dealing with these issues. I guess as a follow-up to that is, the kids are not called to teach you. So we don't want to put this burden on their shoulders of they have to teach and tell you everything, or your colleagues of color, they don't owe you free time and advice. You got to seek resources on your own. And social media is the gift and the curse, but I love being on Twitter. You've got to follow Trump and Biden. You've got to follow Fox News and MSNBC and the BBC, and you've got to gain perspective. Allowing those perspectives into your world doesn't mean that you're going to change the person that you are, but it can inform the lens with which you view your classroom. So you can go to teaching tolerance. You can follow the hashtag disrupt texts. You can look at hashtag clear the air and just start to get some resources on your own. Make sure that when you're seeking resources, if you want to learn about a Black perspective, because there's not just one, so stop writing that single story. But if you want to get some information, there are free webinars out there that you can join and you can sit in on, and you can learn from other people by just listening. So I think recently I've been on Twitter a lot more, and I've been listening to voices. I've been thinking about things that I could have said and done that unintentionally could have made a child feel separate. We have big issues. For example, I was filling in for a teacher once and said, well, you guys have got to sit down. You got to do this, you got to do that. Look, he was out there and he was being rowdy, and now he's sitting, and guess what? That was the dynamite, because the student yelled, "I'm a female," right back at me. So it was really a metaphor for me not seeing her really. She was in transition. And one of the things that was outside of my realm of experience at that point in time as a district level administrator was I still had more to learn. I didn't see her. I literally didn't. I only caught the peripheral. She had a fade. You're going to be embarrassed sometimes. You're going to do the wrong thing sometimes. But you have to listen, and you have to be okay with being wounded, because you have to start getting over yourself and figuring out how not to wound other people. You know, there's that whole saying that says, if you don't heal from the cuts that you have, you're going to bleed over people who didn't inflict the wound.
I think it's important for us to provide the resource of time for our staff, and to provide time to have the conversations about what's going on and how it's going to affect the kids in our care. You can't make time, right? It's a finite number. Everybody's got the same 24 hours, but we've got to take some time to say this thing may not be as important right now. People don't just stop everything that happens at home just because they walked into school, right? They don't stop. They don't forget what they heard on the radio or what they saw on the news or what their parents talked to them about just because they walk into a building that's filled with people that someone else might have been disparaging, just minutes before. So making sure we provide time for teachers to talk about these things and have the conversation, have dialogue, produce some options, and helping them understand that it's going to be uncomfortable. It's a part of the process. And if it causes our teachers a little uncomfort to do what's best for our kids, to make our kids more comfortable, then that's the tough charge that we have to take.
Sometimes curiosity in and of itself is the most gracious way you can offer a gift to other people and yourself in order to put yourself in a broader perspective of what reality is. If you've lived your entire life having racial conversations that are a mile wide and an inch deep, you can have a false sense of being well informed. When I started working with minority issues in the district, and my personal experience was, I went directly from a mile wide, inch deep conversations to mile deep, inch wide. And the temperaments that just flared at the tables and at committees that were specifically designed to address diversity issues were unbelievable. We could not get very deep into a conversation, into an issue, into an experience, into a headline news without somebody who typically was very calm and very easy to talk to, all of a sudden becoming extremely rigid because they were just so cemented in what they have been told was the truth. For a lot of people, here's the difference. We don't know when there's an issue at hand or when there's an emotional trigger. And if there is something that triggers something in me, it doesn't matter what's at hand, it's a trigger. My biggest example is this. I was almost killed by a snake when I was 4 years old. I have a deathly fear of snakes. And I don't care how educational you want to make a snake. If you put a snake in anywhere near me, I am triggered. And this 59-year-old man is going to act like a 3-year-old child. So a trigger and an experience is sometimes very, very easily confused for each other. The first slave on this land is 401 years with experience in some sort of diversity issues. Okay, so if we have 20 generations of people who had free access to education, free access to whatever, and I know there's different stories along the white storyline that not everybody had that. But if we look at 1965 being when all of a sudden we had legal integration, and that's only 55 years, and that is 2.75 generations in comparison to 20 generations. We were very naive to believe that there is no effect, that we are now taking a result of that, or that we're just supposed to forget about the past that easily. It doesn't happen that way.
Thank you, Ruben. So, Ruben, Chestin, Michael, thank you for taking your time this morning to talk about this. And to the audience, we hope that this will give you some strategies and some ideas and some understandings as we work with children. Thank you very much.